Those horses and a girlfriend too,
A very good afternoon to you all, my dear friends and students. My name is Emraj Ramsaran, and I'm from the Rajiv Gandhi Science Center. Technology is advancing at such a high speed that it has now become very important for us to see if technology is an opportunity or it is a risk that needs to be managed. Technology, as you are aware, impacts in all spheres of our life, whether it is transport, whether it is medical, whether it is health, education, and above all, communication. So this live webinar is being brought to you by the Rajiv Gandhi Science Center in the context of the National Science Week 2021, which is a major online feature happening at the Rajiv Gandhi Science Center, which has started only yesterday and that will last this week till the 27th of November. In fact, the Rajiv Gandhi Science Center is that institution which is mandated to promote science and technology in Mauritius. And for this, we've been organizing a very wide range of activities since more than 20 years that we are here. But this time with the COVID-19 pandemic, we've decided to organize. Most of our activities are going online. And like I said, the National Science Week is a regular annual feature at the center. And this time we have decided to organize the National Science Week purely online. So a series of activities is being organized this week, being proposed to the Mauritian population. But I will not discuss on these activities right now, because what is more important for you is about balancing risks and opportunities of new technologies, especially among youngsters. We have in our midst today, Mr. Asagan Chengana from the University of Mauritius. And Mr. Chengana is going to give you a presentation on the title that we just mentioned. Please, if you have any question, you can write your question in the chat or in the question and answer part of your webinar. And stay with us at the end of this webinar. After the question and answer session, I will give you a glimpse, some details about all the online activities happening at the center this week in the context of the National Science Week, so that you can still register, you can still benefit from what we are proposing the population. So that's all from my side for the time being. I will request Mr. Chengana to please, the floor is yours, Mr. Chengana.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ramsaran, to host me in the context of the National Science Week. I am very delighted to share some of my research interests and findings, and I hope that that these findings would be interesting to the attendees, and I'm very thankful to them for attending today's session. And if you allow me, I will start my presentation, but I think that I cannot share my screen yet. Yeah.
Please share your screen, Mr. Chengana. It should be fine.
Great. So I will start my presentation. The title of my presentation is Balancing the Opportunities and Risks of New Technologies for Youngsters. And basically what I have been trying to understand is how since we have been in the COVID era, since 2020, that we have entered in an era where we are being confined almost all the time in our homes, where you find that it is very risky to be outside of your home, and that in many circumstances, schools have been closed down, and that in many countries across the world, there is still lockdowns going on. What has been the impact of the COVID era on our youngsters? So if you look at my slide, you would see that in 2020, Time magazine had a cover story about youngsters, and the title at that time was Generation Pandemic. And the subheading of that particular magazine was, it is a global crisis. A global crisis changed their lives, and how they will respond will change the world. So we are basically in the COVID era. It is very difficult for us to predict as to how the change is going to take place. And what is also very important to understand is that if there is change, it is that the youngsters themselves would be the change agents. So what I have done is I have been looking across the continent to understand that, well, Africa is the world's youngest continent. It is the world's youngest continent in the sense that 60% of its population is under 25 years. And in Mauritius, you would note that around 30% of the population is composed of youngsters, of young people aged between 14 to 35 years. Now, how would these youngsters effect change? How can they contribute to change? Are they subjects of change? Are they themselves being, in a way, the victims or vulnerable to change? Or are they going to make use of their agency for a better world? So this is what I have been trying to find out. So what are the research questions that I have worked on? You would see that there are 3 of them. What are the opportunities and risks that new media or new technologies, especially social media, represent to the youth? What are the ways the youth consume news in the new normal of COVID? And what do these practices reveal about the youth and their social relationships? What do they reveal about socialization? And in order to do this, I have been gathering some information from college students. I have been meeting some 15 to 20 of them from across the island. I have been talking to them, trying to gather data about their uses of technology, and particularly about the way they consume news media, they consume information. And what is interesting from what I gather is that they have been they have voluntarily enrolled in the study. They have been proposing the names of their friends, and this has been part of a snowball sample where we have been working together, and each one of the interviewee would propose the name of their friends. So what I would rapidly go into I will go rapidly into the findings of the study, which is a very short one, which is still ongoing, which is still, I think, which is still to be refined, but I'm just presenting to the panel today the raw findings which I have gathered from that particular study. What comes out very strikingly is the fact that youngsters are very well aware of the fact that they are living in a digital ecology. They are very well aware of the fact that there is lots of information surrounding them. And what is also very interesting is that normally when we think of information, we think of the media, we think of legacy media, we think of the mainstream media. But one thing that comes out very strikingly from what I have gathered from the youngsters is the fact that mostly or almost all of them would highlight the fact that they get information from their friends. It is not necessarily from legacy media. It is not necessarily from mainstream media that they gather information. Normally, we would expect them to look at traditional media. But what they have been telling me is the fact that they get news from their friends. They get news when they are tagged on a particular story, and that most of the information that they get are information that comes to them in incidental ways. That is, they come across these information as a surprise. And what is interesting is that as much as they receive information in their friends' network in an incidental way, it is also that they would not necessarily go and dwell or dig deeper into that information. In fact, they will snack on that particular information, if you allow me this expression, which is that they will go and see and then they will move on, you see? So it's a very fluid kind of environment. They are very well aware of the fact that information is abundant, that information which they receive from their friends are information which matters to them, and that they will not necessarily go deep into that information. They will just use that information as a nugget, as a news nugget. They will just snack over that information and then they will move on. So you can understand that we are living in a world and in a digital environment where things are getting very fluid, where it is very difficult to get the attention of youngsters. And what is also, so what I have gathered a extract from an interview from a youngster, a college student, when he said to me that when a friend puts a story on Facebook, WhatsApp, or Instagram, I get updated automatically about their status. This update is news to me, and it may come as a surprise. For instance, when there is a cyclone, my friend's status can allow me to have a concise idea of the weather situation. But at other times, there may be info on their status which do not relate directly to me. The information can be very personal to the friend, but not to me, and I will just swipe. So this is, I think, an interesting finding in the sense that it shows that people are not necessarily consuming information in a horizontal way, that information comes very in diagonal ways, and that they are just snacking over any information which comes to them. They are snacking on that particular, just like you take a piece of snack, they are just looking at that particular information and then moving on. So the second thing that I think is interesting in terms of the fact that with the COVID pandemic, their lives have been disrupted. Schools have been closed and they are basically being, in a way, they are forced to stay at home. And what is interesting is that even though they may consider themselves to be somewhat victims of the pandemic. At the same time, they considered that with social media, with these new technologies, they are able to create, they are able to collaborate and to have some form of flexibility, which allow them to find solutions to their educational problems. So one student has been telling me that COVID has disrupted our schools, our exam calendar. Our exam calendar was rescheduled, and some of my friends seem to be overreacting. However, with technology, we have worked more in groups, and during the lockdowns, we created revision groups among close friends, and there was more flexibility in our learning. So as much as there is disruption to their life, what you find is the need for them to stay still in groups. So they will create WhatsApp groups, or they will have a group on Facebook, and they will still be in touch with their friends and trying to help each other out with regards to a particular assignment or with regards to a particular exam question. And what is interesting is also the fact that they have indicated to me that teachers are trying to learn their new ways of doing, in the sense that often their teachers would join them in those particular groups. And if ever the teachers can help them out in an exercise, he or she would be happy to do so. So what is happening is that there are new ways of learning that is taking place, that are taking place, in the sense that today youngsters are highlighting the fact that they are not very bookish. Someone told me, I'm not very bookish. In fact, I am a visual reader. I am a visual learner. I prefer to read things on a particular, I prefer video, I prefer images, and I prefer multimedia. And instead of revising a chapter in a book, I would prefer to have a 5 minutes video and to get the gist of a chapter. So this is also interesting because it is indicative of how teaching and learning is changing in with this COVID era, how things are evolving. And we can say that the youngsters are not so much of a victim of this particular era. They are trying to find new ways, trying to trace new trajectories, allowing them to take control, to take back control over their lives. So another thing that has been very interesting in terms of the opportunities is the fact that there are new bondings. I remember talking to one youngster who told me that during the lockdown, the second lockdown, he had the opportunity to watch a number of videos because his father is a car painter. So the fact that these videos were in English allowed him to explain to his dad in Creole that these are new ways of painting cars. And this has allowed him to create new bondings with his father. And as much as there are consolidated social relationship or family relationships, it has also allowed him and his father to increase their clientele. So this is where you find, again, the fact that there is an abundance of information does not mean that they are only passive recipient of this information. In fact, they are very actively using information which is coming to them and trying to use this information as part of their lives and trying to improve their everyday life. So as much as there are new opportunities and there are new fields of studies that are emerging, you have artificial intelligence, you have robotics, you have blockchain technologies, and these are new fields where the youngsters feel that they can have a career, they can have training in these fields, and that they can find scope in terms of a professional life. But at the same time, as we talk of these technologies, there are also a number of difficulties. There are a number of risks which are associated to them. And this has come very strikingly when I have talked to the youngsters. It comes very strikingly the fact that there are different forms of mental suffering, that in fact, there are some youngsters who complain about the fact that there is a lot of dependence, that they have become very dependent on technology, that they have the impression that if they are not on social media, they are missing out on things, and that they have to go back online in order to catch up with things. So one youngster told me that he felt that we are emotionally connected to the stories on social media, but at the same time, they are feeling disconnected from their elders and from their families. And this is one area where I think we should, at least, I understand that many of these youngsters, they are trying to sort out their life. They are trying to find ways so that they can reduce the addiction. But in many cases, the fact that they are addicted bring a lot of trouble to them because they find it very difficult to go outside and to socialize. So this is part of the risk that they see, that they consider to be real in terms of their presence online. The other thing that comes out very strikingly is the fact of fatigue. You have some youngsters have been telling me that there is Zoom fatigue, that they don't want to be too much online, that they don't want to have classes on WhatsApp, on Zoom or any other platform. And that as much as there is a fatigue with technologies, there is also a form of fatigue with the news around COVID. There is this feeling that that the pandemic is not yet over, that they cannot get back to normal lives, and that they have basically disconnected from news and information regarding COVID. And so there is, and I think this is also part of an understanding of how basically we are getting in an era which is very much based on anxiety. And people and the youngsters are not necessarily interested in adding tension to their life. They are very practical. They want to find solutions. They want to move on, and they want to basically get back to normal, okay? The other thing that comes out very strikingly is the fact that there is this feeling of being attracted to everything that is negative online. So you have someone who was telling me, when I find bad news on social media, I am very tempted to find out more. A friend of mine had his surgery, and I was very happy for him as he updated his status about his health. However, bad news gets my attention more. I am tempted to find out about road accidents, as there may be acquaintances that are involved. There were recently 3 cases of suicides on social media related to youngsters who were unsatisfied with their exam results. We had a meeting at school, and they spoke indirectly to us about the problem of suicide among the youth, trying not to dramatize the situation. But social media tends to banalize the problem of suicide, and you are very likely to click on such news. So you see how basically the fact of being alone, the fact of having news coming to them, and news which is very traumatic, which is very upsetting, can have an impact on their mental health. Another thing that comes out in my findings is the fact that youngsters are still trying to, in regards to their identity, for instance, One young college student told me that he feels that he belongs to the queer community, that he is different from his other friends, that he has a sexual identity which is different, and that on social media there is the possibility of them getting visibility because they can express themselves, they can have communities of friends with whom they share their sexual preferences, but at the same time, they find that on social media, there is a risk of being victims of hate and homophobic kind of hate, which is addressed to them. And that at times it is better to be disconnected, that is to put aside their social media profile so that they do not receive hate from people who are not necessarily who do not accept the fact of their difference. So this is also, I think, an important element that we should bear in mind. And the other thing that comes out strikingly is the fact of fake news. A lot of the youngsters to whom I have spoken tell me that they were very surprised around COVID-19, around the treatments which are shared on WhatsApp about COVID-19 and how you can overcome COVID. So one student told me, for example, it may be shared on WhatsApp that by eating garlic, you can cure COVID-19. And strangely, I wondered how in China, where they seem to like chilies, they still got COVID-19. This is also true of India, where they consume a lot of spices. So I had to go online, check this information to find out that it is a hoax. So I would even go on mainstream media to check such news. So as much as there is an abundance of information, there is also information which can be very misleading on social media. But there are other risks which are criminal activities that are taking place online. You can think of online harassment, you can think of hacking, sextortion, and from 2015, if you look at the statistics, you would see that from 2015 to 2021, there are almost 1,888 cases reported to the police over crimes that are taking place online. And these are things that are very difficult to capture because many youngsters feel very embarrassed to talk about the fact that they may have been victims of cybercrime or sextortion. And this is an area where the silence is can be very troubling because someone who has been, let's say, who has been victim of sextortion is very likely to keep silent, to keep quiet over it until it becomes very public, and then of course, they will have to report the matter to the police. But and when we think of youngsters, their online activities, and the fact that they may have difficulties to handle cyber crimes that are taking place, can be, I think there is need for us to address as adults. I think we need to find ways so that we can allow the victims, those who have been victim of cyber crime, that they can have a voice, that they can have channels where they can express themselves, and that it should not be treated only in the form of a police case. There has to be mechanism, there have to be different forms of mechanism that would allow them to express themselves, to have a voice over what they have been victims of on social media. And this is particularly true with regards to minors, to children, and with regards to young women, for instance. We find that a lot of them are victims of these cyber crimes, and often it is very difficult for them to come out over these because there are no proper channels which would allow them to express themselves on what they have endured online. So what is interesting in all these findings is the need, and I think this is what I would insist on, the fact that we need to, at least if it is not formally taught in school, if we do not have media literacy in schools, at least that we do it, that we do media literacy in an informal way, so that we think critically and click wisely. This is a tagline which has been proposed by the UNESCO, and the idea is that we should bear in mind that information, knowledge, messages are not always value neutral or always independent of biases, and it can be very problematic, because one youngster, for instance, shared to me this idea that, you know, with the algorithms of social media, which are very difficult to understand, you get the impression that all the time you are in receiving the same type of information and that you are living in a bubble. How do you basically come out of that bubble? How do you create new forms of engagement? How do you allow the youngsters to be active citizens? Can be very problematic online, because you find that the fact that you like a particular news item, but with these algorithms, you will receive information only about that particular news item, giving you the impression that you are in a bubble and that you need to break out of that bubble in order to be an active member of society. What is also interesting is that information and literacy, media literacy, is not something that has to be taught only once. It is a lived and dynamic experience and process. It is complete when it includes knowledge, skills, and attitude, when it covers access, evaluation, assessment, use and production of production and communication of information, media, and technology content. What is meant by this is that we have to consider the fact that information, that literacy is an ongoing process. It is not something that we have just to teach in a one-off basis and then we are over. I think from what I have gathered, I get the impression that our youngsters are learning the hard way, because what is quite interesting to understand is that when the youngsters are in lockdown situations, when they are at home, they tend to create a form of barrier or boundary between themselves and their parents. And this is quite problematic, because you find that the presence or the presence of their parents during the lockdown, for instance, was quite embarrassing to some of them. They got the impression that their parents were listening to them, that their parents were looking at their social media platforms or their profiles. And this was indicative of the fact that in many families, you find that youngsters are not necessarily talking about what they are doing online to their parents. There is a communication gap between parents and their kids, their children. And this communication gap is, of course, going to make media literacy even more difficult, because when the youngsters are facing a particular problem, they will not talk to their parents, rather they will go to their friends. So we need to think in terms of strategy, in terms of how can we bridge, if you want, the gap between parents and their children over the use of social media, over the use of technologies, and how can we bridge the gap between families and schools about media literacy. So we need to find ways and mechanisms and strategies in order to not only reach out to the youngsters, but also to create a community where you find that people are going to support each other, whether it is a parent or whether it is the father or the mother, or and how basically even the school can be part of that community, so that there is an enabling environment where everyone feels that social media can be, if you want, a safe space. Because for the time being, what you find is that it is a space where there are lots of opportunities, but there are still a lot of risk involved. And the challenge is really to create safe spaces where the youngsters, where young college students can have their voices heard, where they can feel empowered, where they can be active citizens. For instance, if you look at the major challenge of climate change, to what extent can social media be used as an enabler to allow these youngsters to participate and to contribute to change? And having said this, I think there are a number of limitations to my study. The fact of talking to students who seem to be very connected. They are very versatile in their use of social media, but I would be very interested, and I think one of the limitations of this study is the fact that I have not been in areas where youngsters are not present online. That is, I have not been able to look for youngsters who are suffering basically from the digital divide, the fact that they do not have internet connection, the fact that probably they are not using laptops, they do not have the necessary equipments in order to participate in their classes or to participate online with their friends. And the other limitation is the fact that there may be a lot of it may be that youngsters are, this is one of the difficulties that I encountered, the fact that youngsters will talk to you, but you get the impression that they are not necessarily telling you the whole story, that you have got only a version of their experience of social media, but you have the impression that, at least I had this impression that they would not speak the whole, they will not speak the whole truth, or they will not share the whole experience of social media. So, for instance, it is very difficult to talk to them about the problem of cybercrime or risk about sextortions, etc., because for them, these are areas where there seem to be an omerta, if you want, that they do not want to share this kind of experience to others. And as a researcher, I was a bit, I could understand that the fact that I am a researcher, that I am an outsider, can be very problematic in the sense that they would not necessarily reveal or share their whole experience around this risk online. But having said this, I think what is important is for us among as adults, but also as members of our society, that we should find ways and means to address the problem of digital literacy and to create, and I will conclude on this, to create safe spaces online. Thank you for your attention. And if you have any question, I will be happy to address them.
Thank you, Mr. Cheng Anna. So I think from the audience, we do not have any question as such. Mr. Chengana. So I will request again the audience, in case you have any question, please do not hesitate to write it on the question and answer part in your Zoom platform. Otherwise, like I said just before, this National Science Week is going online for the Rajiv Gandhi Science Center, and we are having lots of activities happening since yesterday. Mainly webinars is being organized for those who are still with us. Let me just inform you that tomorrow we are going to have a webinar on Internet of Things. And on Thursday, in Internet of Things, we're also having a webinar on rethinking the education system, especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. We are having workshops for the SME sector on Thursday. And on Friday, we are having one webinar in the morning on tech inventions in bank. We are also having an international forum on science centers with international experts in the field of science centers, and also a webinar that will attract especially youngsters is about artificial intelligence. We are having a very well-renowned scientist on Friday at 4 p.m. Mauritian time. We are hosting a webinar with a very well-renowned scientist in artificial intelligence, Dr. Priyanka Jain. So I will invite you to go on the website of the Rajiv Gandhi Science Center, and under the page National Science Week, you will have an idea of all the activities happening with Rajiv Gandhi Science Center for this National Science Week. And also, I would like also to inform you that we are organizing an online quiz competition. By the way, the first edition was yesterday. We are having 3 online quiz competition this week. One was held yesterday, and as of now, more than 700 participants have already registered for this quiz competition. And tomorrow and even on Friday, we will be having another 2 online quiz competitions where we can win prizes as well. And not to forget about this time, the Rajiv Gandhi Science Center has also innovated in the sense that with the National Science Week, we have one component for what we call science in the media. And we are working together with the Mauritius Broadcasting Corporation. Every day we are having a radio quiz happening in the morning in Cool FM, yes, in the channels of Cool FM and Best FM, where we have a radio quiz. And also we have a TV SMS game, which is ongoing. So if you go on the channels, on the TV channels on the MBC, you will see that we have also organized a TV SMS game where there's a question. And by sending your answer by SMS, you can stand a chance to win a prize. So that was all about the National Science Week. I think I have 1 or 2 questions for us again. Try to see. So I have 1 question from one of my colleagues. What about the fatigue you spoke about for pre-primary schools? Well, for younger children. So this is a question for you, Azagan. What about the fatigue you spoke about for pre-primary schools? So maybe you can say a few more words about this.
I think when I'm talking of fatigue, I am particularly referring to the fact that youngsters, including young children, younger children, they are almost spending all their time online. And the fatigue can come with the fact that many of them would have wished that, for instance, they had their teachers in front of them on a face-to-face basis, because it is over and above, whether it is youngsters or college students, the fatigue comes from the fact that they get the impression that the onus is on them, that learning, for instance, is about them being disciplined and having a particular timetable for specific subjects, etc. So the impression of fatigue is also because of the mediation of technology, that they find that, yeah, the teacher is in front of them, but it's a virtual reality, and the fact of being on a virtual mode can be very frustrating, because you do not necessarily, the teacher is not necessarily considering, for instance, gestures or body language and other important elements of teaching when they are normally in classes. So this is what I mean by fatigue, this impression that everything is virtual and that there is a lack of reality to this.
Okay, I think, well, we do not have any more questions. So thank you very much, all the attendees. We have lots of students who have been connecting with us. Like I said, the National Science Week is continuing at the level of the Rajiv Gandhi Science Center and will not stop before 27th of November. So on behalf of the Rajiv Gandhi Science Center and all the staff, it's a very big thank you to Mr. Azagan Changana of the University of Mauritius. So we thank also the University of Mauritius for making you available for us here. And a very big thank you to all those who have been sparing your time to listen to us and also in supporting us in the promotion of science and technology. So until then, we will be having other webinars. Hope to see you again. Please go on the website of the Rajiv Gandhi Science Center, where you can still connect with us for all our online activities happening for the National Science Week 2021. So it's a very goodbye to you, and thank you very much for your presence here today.
Thank you.